The mining planet of Zephyr 7 was not the kind of place most people wrote home about. It was barren, dusty, and cold, a wasteland where the sun barely peeked over jagged cliffs before vanishing again. For Marcus Mac Callahan, it had become both prison and sanctuary. Once a skilled mechanic aboard interstellar freighters, Mac had washed up here 5 years ago after a string of bad choices left him with nothing but scars and regrets. Now he spent his days scavenging for scrap metal and rare minerals, selling what little he found to passing traders just to survive. On this particular evening, Mac trudged back to his outpost after another long day of digging through debris fields. His boots crunched against the rocky ground as he adjusted the strap of his heavy satchel, which clinked faintly with salvaged parts. The sky above him shimmered faintly with auroras caused by solar winds battering the planet's thin atmosphere, but something felt off. There was an unease in the air, like static electricity prickling the back of his neck. Just as he reached the edge of his camp, a modest collection of prefab units surrounded by makeshift barricades, a streak of light tore across the horizon. At first, Mac thought it was a meteorite, but then he realized it was moving too deliberately, too fast. Whatever it wasn't natural. With a deafening roar that rattled his bones, the object plummeted toward the desert beyond the cliffs. Curiosity got the better of him. Grabbing a flashlight and a plasma cutter from his toolkit, Mac hopped onto his all-terrain rover and headed toward the crash site. The journey took nearly an hour, the terrain growing rougher the closer he got. When he finally arrived, the scene before him made his breath catch. A sleek, otherworldly craft lay embedded in the sand, its metallic surface scorched and cracked. Smoke curled lazily into the night sky, and the faint hum of failing systems buzzed in the air. Mac hesitated for a moment, gripping the handle of his flashlight tightly. He'd heard stories about alien ships crashing on remote planets. Some claimed they carried treasures beyond imagination. Others whispered warnings of dangerous cargo. Either way, poking around could mean trouble. But something compelled him forward. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe, deep down, Mac still believed there was some good left in the universe worth saving. As he approached the wreckage, he noticed movement inside. Shadows shifted behind fractured panels, and soft groans echoed faintly. Steeling himself, Mac climbed carefully over twisted metal and peered into the cockpit. What he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. There, slumped against the controls, was an alien unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered like liquid opal, catching the dim light of his flashlight. Long, delicate limbs sprawled awkwardly across the seat, and her hair, or what seemed like hair, floated gently, defying gravity. Most striking were her eyes, closed now, but unmistakably glowing faintly beneath translucent lids. She looked frail, almost ethereal, yet undeniably alive. Mac's heart raced. Should he run? Leave her here? No one would blame him if he did. This wasn't his problem. Yet, when she stirred weakly and let out a soft moan, something inside him softened. "Hey," he said softly, crouching beside her. "You okay?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing swirling galaxies within their depths. She stared at him for a moment, confusion etched across her face. Then, in halting, accented words, she spoke. "Help, please." That was all it took. Without another thought, Mac hoisted her gently into his arms and carried her back to his rover. The alien was lighter than he expected, almost weightless, and her skin radiated a warmth that felt oddly comforting. As he drove back to his outpost, she drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling phrases in a language he couldn't understand. By the time they reached his shelter, Mac had already decided 2 things. First, this mysterious visitor needed care, and lots of it. Second, whoever she was no ordinary alien. Something about her presence felt important, like fate itself had dropped her into his lap. Little did Mac know, his quiet life on Zephyr 7 was about to change forever. And the girl lying unconscious on his cot, she wasn't just lost. She was royalty. Would you like me to continue expanding the next part, Part 2, in similar detail, back at his outpost? Mac wasted no time tending to the mysterious alien. He laid her gently on a cot in the corner of his workshop, a space that doubled as both living quarters and repair bay. The room was cluttered with tools, spare parts, and stacks of old holovids he'd scavenged over the years. It wasn't exactly a hospital, but it would have to do. Her condition worried him. Her shimmering skin had grown pale, almost translucent, and her breathing was shallow. Whatever crash landing she'd endured must have taken a toll on her frail body. Using what little medical knowledge he'd picked up during his days aboard freighters, Mac cleaned her wounds with antiseptic gel and bandaged them carefully. Then, unsure of what else to do, he covered her with a blanket and set a small heater nearby to keep her warm. For the next few days, Mac kept vigil by her side. She drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring softly in her melodic language whenever she stirred. Though he couldn't understand her words, there was something soothing about the sound, like listening to wind chimes under a starry sky. On the third day, she finally woke up fully. Her glowing eyes scanned the room before settling on Mac, who sat cross-legged on the floor tinkering with an old holoprojector. When their gazes met, she blinked slowly, as if trying to make sense of where she was, or who he was. "Hey," Mac said cautiously, setting the projector aside. "You're awake." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that seemed equal parts curiosity and caution. After a moment, she spoke, her voice soft but deliberate. "Thank you." The words came haltingly, clearly unfamiliar to her tongue. Mac smiled faintly. "No problem. I'm Mac. What's your name?" She hesitated, then replied, Luma. He repeated, testing the syllables. "That's a nice name." Luma nodded weakly, though her gaze remained distant. Over the next few hours, they communicated in broken bits of universal basic, the lingua franca of the galaxy, and gestures. Luma explained that her ship had malfunctioned, forcing her to land here unexpectedly. But when Mac pressed for more details, like where she came from or why she was traveling alone, she grew evasive, shaking her head and avoiding his questions. Despite her reluctance to share, a bond began forming between them. Days turned into weeks as Luma regained her strength. During that time, Mac introduced her to snippets of human culture. One evening, while repairing a faulty power converter, he noticed her staring intently at a stack of battered holovids stacked against the wall. "What are those?" she asked, pointing to the discs. "They're movies," Mac explained, picking one up. "Stories people watch for fun. Wanna see?" Intrigued, Luma nodded eagerly. Mac popped the disc into the holoprojector, and soon the room filled with flickering images of swashbuckling heroes and far-off planets. Luma watched with wide-eyed fascination, occasionally laughing or gasping at dramatic moments. For someone who appeared so otherworldly, her reactions were surprisingly human. As they spent more time together, Luma started teaching Mac fragments of her own language. Her speech flowed like music, each word carrying layers of meaning beyond its literal translation. In return, Mac taught her simple phrases in English, chuckling whenever she stumbled over tricky sounds. Their lessons became a form of connection, a way to bridge the vast gap between their worlds. But not everything was peaceful. Strange occurrences began happening around the outpost. Equipment would suddenly shut off without explanation, only to restart moments later. Shadows seemed to move when no one was looking, and once, Mac swore he saw faint lights dancing outside his window late at night. At first, he dismissed these incidents as tricks of the mind or glitches caused by Zephyr 7's harsh environment. But deep down, he suspected they were connected to Luma. One night, unable to sleep, Mac stepped outside to check the perimeter. The desert stretched endlessly before him, bathed in silver moonlight. As he scanned the horizon, he spotted movement, a dark shape darting between rocks. Squinting, he grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the figure. but whatever it was vanished instantly. Heart pounding, Mac returned inside to find Luma sitting upright on the cot, her eyes wide and alert. "What is it?" she asked, sensing his unease. "I thought I saw something out there," Mac admitted, glancing toward the door. "Probably nothing." Luma didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at her hands, which glowed faintly in the dim light. For a moment, Mac thought he saw patterns shifting beneath her skin, like constellations rearranging themselves. Then, just as quickly, the glow faded, leaving her looking as fragile as ever. "You should stay hidden," she whispered finally. "They will come." "Who?" Mac demanded, crouching beside her. "Luma, you need to tell me what's going on." She shook her head, her expression pained. "Not safe. Not yet." Frustrated but unwilling to push further, Mac let the matter drop, for now. Still, her warning lingered in his mind, gnawing at him like a splinter he couldn't remove. Whoever they were, they clearly posed a threat. And judging by the look in Luma's eyes, she knew far more than she was letting on. Over the following days, Mac redoubled his efforts to fortify the outpost. He reinforced the barricades, rigged motion sensors around the perimeter, and even dug out an old blaster rifle he hadn't touched in years. Meanwhile, Luma withdrew into herself, spending long hours gazing out the window as if waiting for something or someone. Then, one morning, the sensors went off. Mac bolted upright, heart racing, as alarms blared through the outpost. Grabbing the rifle, he peered through a crack in the wall to see several ships descending from the sky. Sleek and menacing, they hovered silently above the ground, scanning the area with pulsating beams of light. "They found us," Luma whispered behind him, her voice trembling. Mac turned to face her, determination hardening his features. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "I won't let them take you." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his mind. Who were these people? And how far were they willing to go to capture Luma? Whatever answers lay ahead, one thing was certain. Their quiet life in the wilderness was over. Would you like me to continue expanding the next part, Part 3, in similar detail? The ships descended like vultures circling prey, their sleek hulls glinting ominously under Zephyr 7's pale sunlight. Mac clenched his blaster rifle tightly, every muscle in his body tense as he watched them spread out across the barren landscape. Whoever they weren't here for a casual visit. Their movements were calculated, methodical, like hunters closing in on a target. "Stay low," Mac whispered sharply, glancing back at Luma. She crouched behind an overturned workbench, her luminous eyes wide with fear. Her hands trembled slightly, and Mac could see faint sparks of energy dancing along her fingertips, an involuntary reaction, perhaps, to whatever danger loomed outside. "They're not supposed to find me," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. "Not yet." Mac frowned. "What do you mean, not yet?" he demanded, keeping his voice low but urgent. "Who are these people?" Luma hesitated, clearly torn between trust and caution. Finally, she sighed softly. "They work for enemies, those who want me gone." "That doesn't tell me much," Mac shot back, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "Look, if we're gonna survive this, I need answers. Now." Before Luma could respond, one of the ships fired a warning shot, blasting a nearby rock formation into dust. The sound echoed through the outpost, shaking the prefab walls violently. Mac cursed under his breath and raised his weapon instinctively, though he knew it wouldn't make a dent against such advanced technology. "All right, new plan," he said, turning back to Luma. "We can't stay here. There's a hidden tunnel system about 2 kilometers east of here. It leads to an old mining shaft. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Luma nodded quickly, though uncertainty lingered in her gaze. "I will slow you down," she admitted quietly. "But I trust you." That admission caught Mac off guard. Trust was something he hadn't earned easily in his life, and hearing those words from someone so mysterious and so important, judging by her cryptic warnings, stirred something deep within him. For now, he pushed the feeling aside. They had no time for sentimentality. Grabbing a backpack, Mac stuffed it with essentials: water rations, protein bars, a first aid kit, and a portable holomap he'd salvaged months ago. He also slung a second blaster rifle over his shoulder, just in case Luma needed to defend herself. Then, motioning for her to follow, he slipped out the back entrance of the outpost, staying low to avoid detection. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of jagged rocks and shifting sands. The air was cold and biting, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone from the ship's engines. Mac led the way, weaving between boulders and natural formations to break their line of sight. Every step felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong move, and they'd be spotted. Behind him, Luma moved silently despite her weakened state. Occasionally, she paused to steady herself, her glowing skin casting faint shadows on the ground. Each time, Mac resisted the urge to stop and help her, knowing speed was their only advantage. But guilt gnawed at him all the same. After what felt like hours, they reached the entrance to the tunnel system, a narrow crevice partially obscured by fallen debris. Mac knelt down and began clearing away rocks, working quickly but carefully to avoid making noise. As he did, he noticed Luma staring intently at the sky above them. "They're coming closer," she whispered, her voice tinged with alarm. Sure enough, the distant whine of hovercrafts grew louder, accompanied by the rhythmic thud of boots hitting the ground. Scouts had been deployed, scouring the area systematically. Time was running out. "This way," Mac hissed, pulling Luma into the crevice once the path was clear. The tunnel beyond was dark and damp, its walls lined with veins of iridescent minerals that glowed faintly in the dim light. It wasn't exactly welcoming, but it was shelter, and right now, that was enough. As they ventured deeper, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the eerie drip of water echoing through the cavernous space. Mac activated a small flashlight clipped to his belt, casting a weak beam ahead of them. The tunnel twisted and turned unpredictably, forcing them to navigate by memory rather than sight. "How far is this place?" Luma asked after several minutes, her breathing labored. "Not too far," Mac replied, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "Just keep moving." Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through his ankle as something snagged it mid-step. Letting out a startled yelp, Mac stumbled forward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Cursing, he looked down to see a tangle of wires wrapped tightly around his leg, a crude but effective trap meant to deter intruders. "Careful," Luma warned, rushing to his side. Kneeling beside him, she placed her hands gently on the wires. To Mac's astonishment, they began to glow softly, then disintegrated into harmless ash. "How did you?" he started, but Luma cut him off with a shake of her head. "No time for questions," she said firmly, helping him to his feet. "We must keep going." Grateful for her intervention, Mac pressed onward, limping slightly but determined not to let the injury slow them down. After another 10 minutes of navigating the labyrinthine tunnels, they finally emerged into a larger chamber, the abandoned mining shaft Mac had mentioned earlier. Rusty equipment littered the floor, and thick cables hung loosely from the ceiling like dead vines. Despite its dilapidated state, the space offered some semblance of safety. For a moment, both of them simply stood there, catching their breath. Then, without warning, the ground trembled violently, sending loose rocks tumbling from the ceiling. Somewhere above, explosions erupted, shaking the very foundations of the planet. "They've found our trail," Luma said grimly, clutching Mac's arm. "We cannot run forever." Mac met her gaze, resolve hardening in his eyes. "Then we fight." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the sinking feeling that their odds were slipping further out of reach. Whatever, or whoever, was hunting them, they were running out of places to hide. Would you like me to continue expanding the next part, Part 4, in similar detail? The explosions above grew louder, reverberating through the abandoned mining shaft like thunder. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating everything in a fine layer of grit. Mac and Luma exchanged a glance, his determined but wary, hers filled with quiet resolve tinged with fear. "We can't stay here," Mac said firmly, tightening his grip on the blaster rifle slung over his shoulder. "If they've traced us this far, it's only a matter of time before they breach the tunnels." Luma nodded, her shimmering skin glowing faintly in the dim light. "They are relentless," she admitted softly, "and they will not stop until I am gone." Mac frowned, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You still haven't told me who they are or why they're after you. Whatever secrets you're keeping, they're putting both our lives at risk." Luma hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. For a moment, she seemed torn between trust and caution. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. "I come from a place called Vela Prime. It is the heart of my people's empire, a vast coalition of worlds united under one crown. But that unity is fragile. My family has ruled for generations, but now, factions rise against us. They seek to overthrow my mother, the Empress, and claim power for themselves." Mac listened intently, his brow furrowing as pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. "So what does that have to do with you?" "I am." Luma paused, struggling to find the right words. "I am Alira Vale, the heir to the throne." Mac stared at her, stunned. Of all the possibilities he'd considered during their journey together, this wasn't one of them. "Wait, you're telling me you're some kind of princess from another galaxy?" She nodded solemnly. "Yes. And those hunting me, they work for Lord Veros, my uncle. He staged my disappearance to destabilize my family's rule. If he succeeds, countless lives will suffer under his tyranny." Mac let out a low whistle, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that explains a lot. Like why you've been so secretive, and why those ships out there look like they mean business." Before Luma could respond, another tremor shook the chamber, stronger this time. Metal beams groaned overhead, threatening to collapse. Outside, the sound of boots echoed closer, accompanied by voices shouting orders in an unfamiliar language. "They're coming," Luma whispered urgently. "Then we need to move," Mac replied, scanning the room for options. Spotting a rusted ladder leading up to a higher level, he gestured toward it. "Up there. Maybe we can find another exit or set up an ambush." Without hesitation, Luma followed him as they climbed the ladder, emerging onto a narrow catwalk suspended high above the main chamber. From this vantage point, they had a clear view of the entrance below. And sure enough, armored figures appeared moments later, weapons drawn. Mac raised his blaster rifle cautiously, aiming at the first intruder. "Stay behind me," he instructed Luma, positioning himself protectively in front of her. But Luma didn't listen. Instead, she stepped forward, her hands glowing brighter than before. Before Mac could protest, she extended her arms, releasing a pulse of energy that rippled outward like a shockwave. The mercenaries froze mid-step, their weapons shorting out in bursts of sparks. One by one, they collapsed to the ground, unconscious. "What the hell was that?" Mac exclaimed, lowering his weapon and staring at her in disbelief. "I told you, I am not powerless," Luma said quietly, though exhaustion lined her features. "But such displays take their toll. I cannot keep doing this indefinitely." Mac nodded grimly, understanding the gravity of their situation. While Luma's abilities were impressive, they weren't infinite. And judging by the increasing number of enemies pouring into the tunnels, they wouldn't last long without reinforcements. "We need help," Mac declared, turning back to Luma. "Do you know anyone who might be loyal to your family? Anyone nearby?" Luma thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "There is a resistance group operating in secret. They call themselves the Valen Vanguard. If we can reach them, they may aid us." "And where exactly are they?" Mac asked skeptically. "In orbit around Zephyr 7, Luma replied. "Commander Cal Drain leads them. He served under my father before his death. If anyone can help us reclaim my throne, It is him. Mac sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Great, so now we just need to somehow get off this rock and rendezvous with a rebel fleet floating in space. No problem, right? Despite the sarcasm, Luma smiled faintly. You have gotten us this far. Mac, I believe we can succeed. Her faith in him was unexpected and oddly motivating. Taking a deep breath, Mac nodded. All right, here's the plan. We double back through the tunnels, grab whatever supplies we can carry, and make a break for my rover. Once we're topside, I'll rig it to go faster than it should. We'll signal the Vanguard when we're close enough. Sound good? It sounds dangerous, Luma admitted. That's because it is. Mac shot back with a wry grin. But since when has that stopped us? With renewed determination, they retraced their steps through the tunnels, moving quickly but carefully to avoid further traps. Along the way, Mac scavenged additional tools and spare parts from the wreckage littering the mine, stuffing them into his backpack. Every little bit would help once they reached the surface. When they finally emerged into the open air, the scene was chaos. The mercenaries had regrouped, their numbers bolstered by fresh arrivals. Hovercrafts zipped across the sky, firing indiscriminately at anything that moved. Mac and Luma ducked behind a cluster of boulders, assessing their next move. This is going to be tricky, Mac muttered, eyeing the distance to his rover parked near the outpost. Even if they made it there, escaping the planet alive felt like a long shot. We can do this, Luma said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. Her touch sent a jolt of energy coursing through him. Not painful, but invigorating, like a surge of adrenaline. Taking a deep breath, Mac tightened his grip on the blaster rifle. All right then, let's give them hell. With that, they burst from cover, racing toward the rover as blaster fire erupted around them. Each step brought them closer to freedom and farther into danger. But one thing was certain, neither of them intended to give up without a fight. The sprint to the rover felt like an eternity. Blaster bolts whizzed past Mac and Luma, scorching the ground in bursts of sparks. Each step was a gamble, every heartbeat pounding louder than the chaos around them. Mac kept his focus razor-sharp, zigzagging between boulders and debris, while keeping one hand firmly on Luma's arm. She followed close behind, her glowing skin casting faint shadows that danced eerily across the barren landscape. When they finally reached the rover, Mac didn't waste a second. He threw open the storage compartment, dumping out non-essential supplies to make room for the tools and parts he'd scavenged from the mine. Get in, he shouted, tossing a blaster rifle into Luma's lap before climbing into the driver's seat. Luma hesitated for a brief moment, clutching the weapon awkwardly. I've never used something like this, she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. You'll figure it out, Mac replied grimly, revving the engine. Just point and shoot if anyone gets too close. With a roar, the rover lurched forward, kicking up clouds of dust as it sped toward the horizon. Behind them, the mercenaries scrambled onto hovercrafts, giving chase with relentless determination. The air crackled with energy as blaster fire lit up the sky, forcing Mac to swerve violently to avoid being hit. Hold on, he yelled over the din, yanking the wheel hard to the left as a bolt narrowly missed their rear tires. The rover bounced wildly over jagged rocks, threatening to overturn at any moment. Despite the danger, Luma clung tightly to her seat, gripping the blaster rifle with trembling hands. When another craft swooped low, firing directly at them, instinct took over. She leaned out the side window, aimed shakily, and pulled the trigger. A burst of blue energy erupted from the barrel, striking the hovercraft's wing and sending it spiraling out of control. Mac glanced sideways, both impressed and alarmed. Not bad for a beginner, he said with a quick grin, though his eyes remained fixed on the treacherous path ahead. Despite Luma's unexpected shot, the odds were still stacked against them. More ships closed in, boxing them in from all sides. Just when it seemed escape was impossible, Mac spotted a narrow canyon up ahead. a potential shortcut to the rendezvous coordinates Luma had provided earlier. Without hesitation, he gunned the engine, weaving through the rocky passage with reckless precision. Inside the canyon, the walls loomed high above them, muffling the sounds of pursuit. For a fleeting moment, it felt like they might actually lose their attackers. But then, a deafening explosion rocked the ground beneath them. One of the mercenaries had detonated a charge near the entrance, collapsing part of the canyon wall and sealing off their exit. Mac slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just short of the rubble. Damn it, he cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the steering wheel. They were trapped. Luma placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "We are not defeated yet," she said softly, her voice steady despite the dire situation. Closing her eyes, she raised her arms, palms facing outward. Her skin began to shimmer brighter, pulsating with an ethereal glow. Energy gathered around her fingertips, swirling into a concentrated beam that she directed at the fallen rocks. With a thunderous rumble, the debris disintegrated, clearing a narrow path through the obstruction. Max stared at her in awe. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" "There is a cost," she replied weakly, slumping back into her seat. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Using her powers clearly drained her, but there was no time to rest. Beyond the newly cleared path, the mercenaries regrouped, determined to finish what they'd started. "We need backup, and fast," Mac muttered, flooring the accelerator once more. "Do you think your friends will answer our signal?" "They must," Luma whispered, clutching the communicator device she'd activated earlier. "If they don't." She didn't finish the thought, but Mac understood. Failure wasn't an option. Hours later, after a harrowing journey across Zephyr 7's unforgiving terrain, they finally reached the designated extraction zone, a flat expanse of cracked earth surrounded by jagged cliffs. Above them, the sky shimmered faintly, an atmospheric distortion caused by cloaked ships hovering in orbit. As Mac parked the rover and climbed out, his heart sank. There was no sign of the vanguard. "They're late," he growled, pacing anxiously. "Are you sure they got the message?" Before Luma could respond, a low hum filled the air. Slowly, a sleek vessel descended from the heavens, its hull gleaming like polished obsidian. Landing struts extended with mechanical precision as the ship touched down gently on the ground. A hatch hissed open, revealing a squad of heavily armed soldiers clad in black and silver armor. Then came Commander Cale Drain. Tall and imposing, Drain exuded authority with every step. His weathered face bore scars earned in countless battles, and his piercing gray eyes seemed to weigh the worth of everyone he met. When those eyes landed on Luma, however, they softened slightly. "Princess Alara," he said, bowing deeply. "It is an honor to see you alive." Luma stepped forward, her posture regal despite her weary appearance. "Commander Drain, your arrival is most welcome." Drain straightened, glancing briefly at Mac before returning his attention to Luma. "We received your distress call, but feared the worst. Lord Veros has been relentless in his pursuit of you." "He nearly succeeded," Luma admitted, gesturing to Mac. "Were it not for him, I would not stand here today." Drain's gaze shifted to Mac, studying him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "A human?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "How did you come to cross paths with the princess?" "It's a long story," Mac replied dryly. "One I'll save for later, if we live that long." Drain nodded curtly. "Fair enough. For now, let us focus on getting off this planet." Turning to his troops, he barked orders, directing them to secure the area while preparing the ship for departure. As the group boarded the vessel, Mac couldn't shake the feeling that not everyone aboard trusted him, or even wanted him there. Several soldiers exchanged wary glances as he passed, their hands resting conspicuously on their weapons. Drain himself remained guarded, speaking only to Luma during the flight to their hidden base. Once on board, Luma led Mac to a small chamber where she collapsed onto a bench, utterly spent. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. For everything. Mac shrugged, trying to play it cool despite the weight of everything that had happened. Hey, I'm just glad you're safe. But listen, once we get wherever we're going, you're gonna need to explain what comes next. Because if your uncle's forces find us again, I want to know exactly what I'm fighting for. Luma smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting galaxies. You already know why, she said simply. Because it is the right thing to do. Max sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, well, doing the right thing usually gets me into trouble. Despite the tension surrounding them, there was an unspoken bond between Mac and Luma, one forged in fire and tempered by trust. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And somewhere deep inside, Mac realized he wouldn't have it any other way. The Vanguard's hidden base was unlike anything Mac had ever seen. Nestled within the asteroid belt orbiting Zephyr 7, it was a sprawling complex of modular stations connected by transparent tubes that glowed faintly in the void of space. From the outside, it looked like a fragile web spun between jagged rocks, but inside, it buzzed with activity. Soldiers moved briskly through corridors, technicians monitored banks of holographic displays, and engineers worked tirelessly on sleek starships docked in adjacent hangars. For the first time since meeting Luma, Mac felt a flicker of hope. Surrounded by allies dedicated to her cause, he allowed himself to believe they might actually stand a chance against Lord Veros. But as the hours passed, that optimism began to waver. Commander Drain called an emergency meeting in the war room, a circular chamber dominated by a massive holomap projecting the layout of Vela Prime's capital city. Standing at its center, Drain gestured to various points on the map while outlining their plan. Veros has fortified the palace stronghold, he explained, his voice steady but grim. His forces control key sectors of the city, including supply lines and communication hubs. To reclaim the throne, we must neutralize these positions before launching a direct assault on the palace. Mac leaned against the wall near the back of the room, arms crossed as he listened intently. While everyone else seemed focused on tactics and logistics, he couldn't help noticing how much pressure rested on Luma's slender shoulders. She sat quietly at the table, her luminous eyes fixed on the map, absorbing every detail. Though she appeared calm, Mac could see the tension etched into her features. This wasn't just about reclaiming power. It was about saving her people from tyranny. When the briefing concluded, Drain dismissed the group, though he motioned for Mac to stay behind. Once the others had filed out, the commander turned to him, his expression unreadable. You've done well protecting the princess, he said evenly. But now you must understand, this mission is not meant for humans. It will be dangerous, even deadly. Mac bristled slightly at the implication. I didn't sign up for any of this, he shot back. But I'm not leaving her side now. She saved my life back there, whether you know it or not. Drain studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, but don't let your loyalty cloud your judgment. We need clear heads if we're to succeed. The final battle began days later under the cover of darkness. A fleet of Vanguard ships emerged from hyperspace, descending upon Vela Prime with precision and purpose. Their arrival triggered immediate retaliation. Lord Veros' defenses lit up the night sky with streaks of crimson energy, turning the atmosphere into a fiery inferno. Inside one of the lead fighters, Mac gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. Piloting wasn't exactly his area of expertise, but Luma had insisted he join the aerial assault. We fight together, she'd said firmly when he protested. Now, as explosions erupted around him, he wished he'd argued harder. Stay close to my wing, came a voice over the comms. It belonged to Captain Rin, a seasoned pilot leading the squadron. Her ship darted gracefully through enemy fire, weaving between blasts with practiced ease. Mac followed as best he could, dodging incoming missiles and returning fire whenever possible. Despite his lack of experience, adrenaline kept him sharp, guiding his instincts as chaos unfolded around him. Meanwhile, on the ground, Luma led a team of vanguard operatives toward the palace. Dressed in lightweight combat gear provided by the rebels, she moved with surprising agility, her shimmering skin blending eerily with the glow of distant fires. Every step brought her closer to confronting the man who had orchestrated her downfall and stolen her family's legacy. As they breached the outer perimeter of the stronghold, resistance intensified. Troops loyal to Veros emerged from fortified positions, firing relentlessly at the advancing force. Luma raised her hands, unleashing another pulse of energy that sent shockwaves rippling outward. Enemies collapsed where they stood, their weapons rendered useless. Yet each use of her powers left her weaker, her movements growing slower and more labored. Back in the skies, Mac spotted a squadron of enemy fighters closing in on Rin's position. Without hesitation, he veered sharply, positioning himself between her ship and theirs. "What are you doing?" she demanded over the comms. "Covering Mir 6, he replied, squeezing the trigger on his blasters. Streams of energy lanced through the void, striking two of the pursuing ships and sending them spiraling into oblivion. The remaining fighters broke off, retreating into the chaos of the battlefield. "You're reckless," Rin muttered, though there was a note of gratitude in her tone. "But effective." Inside the palace, Luma reached the throne room, where Lord Veros awaited her. Tall and imposing, he wore ceremonial armor adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with dark energy. His cold gaze locked onto hers as he stepped forward, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "So the prodigal princess returns," he sneered. "Did you really think you could defeat me?" Luma stood tall despite her exhaustion, her voice unwavering. "This ends now, uncle. You've caused enough suffering." Veros laughed bitterly. "Suffering? My dear niece, I am merely securing our empire's future, a future you were too weak to uphold." With a wave of his hand, he unleashed a torrent of shadowy tendrils, lashing out at her with devastating force. Luma countered with her own energy, creating a barrier that absorbed the attack. Sparks flew as their powers collided, filling the room with a deafening roar. Outside, Mac watched anxiously from his fighter as flashes of light illuminated the palace windows. He knew Luma was fighting for more than just her crown, for justice, for her people, for everything she believed in. And though fear gnawed at him, he also felt pride swelling in his chest. "She's stronger than anyone gives her credit for," he murmured to himself, tightening his grip on the controls. "Including me." In the throne room, Luma gathered every ounce of strength she had left. With a final surge of energy, she shattered Veros' defenses, sending him crashing to the ground. As he lay defeated, she approached him, her expression resolute. "It's over," she declared softly. "You won't hurt anyone else." And with that, the siege ended, not with a roar, but with quiet resolution. The throne room was silent except for the faint hum of residual energy lingering in the air. Luma stood over her defeated uncle, Lord Veros, who lay sprawled on the floor, his ceremonial armor cracked and darkened by the force of her final assault. His cruel smile had faded, replaced by an expression of shock and disbelief. For all his schemes and manipulations, he had never anticipated being brought down by the very niece he sought to eliminate. Luma knelt beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting both sorrow and resolve. "You chose fear as your weapon," she said softly, her voice carrying no trace of malice. "But I will rule with hope." She reached out, placing a hand gently on his forehead. A faint pulse of light passed between them, and Veros' body went still. Whether it was mercy or justice that guided her actions, only Luma knew, but whatever it was, it marked the end of his reign of terror. As the realization sank in among the vanguard forces outside the palace, cheers erupted across the battlefield. Soldiers embraced one another, tears streaming down their faces as they celebrated the liberation of their homeworld. The capital city, once shrouded in oppression, now pulsed with newfound life. Lights flickered back on, communication channels reopened, and citizens poured into the streets, waving banners emblazoned with the crest of the Valen Empire. Mac watched the scene unfold from his fighter, hovering just above the palace spires. Though physically exhausted, his heart swelled with pride as he gazed at the shimmering skyline below. Against all odds, they had succeeded. The woman he'd saved, a lost alien princess, had reclaimed her rightful place as heir to the galactic throne. Yet, even amidst the jubilation, a bittersweet ache settled in his chest. When he landed in the palace hangar, he found Luma waiting for him. Her opalescent skin glowed faintly in the dim light, though fatigue lined her features. Despite everything she'd endured, there was a quiet strength about her, a regality that commanded respect without demanding it. "You did it," Max said simply, offering her a small smile. "Congratulations, Your Highness." Luma tilted her head slightly, studying him with those galaxy-like eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mac. You saved me, not just from my enemies, but from despair. You reminded me what it means to trust again." Mac shifted uncomfortably, scratching the back of his neck. "Hey, don't mention it. Just doing what anyone else would have done." "But not everyone would," Luma countered gently. "That's why I want to ask you something important." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "Stay here, with me. As my advisor, my friend, my confidant. Together, we can rebuild this empire and ensure its future is brighter than its past." For a moment, Mac didn't respond. The offer was tempting, more than he cared to admit. To stay by Luma's side, to help shape the destiny of an entire galaxy, it was an opportunity most people could only dream of. But deep down, he knew it wasn't meant for him. "I appreciate the offer," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "But this isn't my world, Luma. I'm just a mechanic from a forgotten mining planet. I don't belong in palaces or courtrooms. Besides, you've got plenty of loyal people around you who'll do a better job than I ever could." Luma frowned slightly, disappointment flickering across her face. "Are you certain? There's so much good you could do here." "I am," Mac replied firmly, though his tone softened. "But hey, maybe someday I'll drop by for a visit. See how things are going. Who knows, you might need a spare part fixed or two." A ghost of a smile returned to Luma's lips. "Then I suppose I'll have to keep a workshop ready for you." With that, they shared a long, unspoken moment, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they'd formed. Though their paths were diverging, neither doubted the impact they'd had on each other's lives. The next morning, Max stood aboard a refurbished freighter docked in the palace hangar. It wasn't the sleekest ship in the fleet, but it was sturdy enough to carry him wherever he decided to go next. As he prepared for departure, Commander Drain approached him, extending a hand. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Callahan," Drain said gruffly, though there was genuine gratitude in his voice. "Not many humans would have risked their lives for our cause." Mac shook his hand firmly. "Just call me Mac. And honestly, I didn't do it for your cause. I did it for her." Drain nodded knowingly. "She won't forget that. None of us will." Before boarding the ship, Mac turned to see Luma standing nearby, watching him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He walked over to her, pulling a small object from his pocket, the repaired holoprojector they'd used during their journey together. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Something to remember me by. Maybe you can use it to show your people some of those old movies I showed you." Luma accepted the gift, cradling it gently in her hands. "I'll treasure it always," she promised. Then, after a brief hesitation, she stepped forward and embraced him, an act that caught him completely off guard. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to linger in the warmth of her presence before stepping back. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Max said, his voice thick with emotion. "And take care of your people. They're lucky to have you. And you're lucky to be free." Luma replied, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Wherever you go, may the stars guide you." With that, Mac climbed aboard the freighter and powered up the engines. As the ship ascended into the sky, he glanced back one last time at the glowing city below, and at the figure standing alone on the landing platform, watching him disappear into the void. Out among the stars, Mac plotted a course for parts unknown. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, full of possibilities and adventures yet to come. Though he'd left behind a princess, a throne, and a chance at glory, he felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time in a long time, he was free, not bound by duty or obligation, but by choice. And somewhere far away, on the glittering planet of Vela Prime, Princess Alira Vale ascended to her throne, vowing to honor the man who had saved her, not just as a hero, but as a friend who had reminded her of the goodness still left in the universe.